Good afternoon and welcome. I'm so very grateful that you've joined us here today once again. I'm Alina Dorian, the Associate Dean for Public Health Practice, as well as Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. But I've also been a school principal for 10 years. Therefore, I'm even more excited that you've joined us now for our fifth in a series of webinars titled Principal Practices for Safe Schools. I want to quickly take a moment, as always, to thank our collaborating partners, the UCLA School of Education and Information Studies, the California Safe Schools for All team, the California Department of Education, the Association of California School Administrators, and our California Connected Consortium, consisting of the California Department of Public Health and our academic partner, UC San Francisco. As we all know, the state's Safe Schools for All team released new guidance for school reopening in mid-January, and under that K-12 consolidated framework, the state provided detailed guidance around the school's COVID-19 safety plan, the CSP, and its two main components, the school's guidance checklist and the Cal-OSHA COVID-19 prevention plan, the CPP. Today, we're lucky to have with us insightful public health experts, as well as our incredible school administrators who, along with me, will pose questions to our experts around ventilation and disinfection in our schools. Our hope is to create a dialogue to better inform, empower, and create confidence in the decisions we need to make to open our schools and to keep our schools safe. So we're going to begin by hearing from our public health experts and then transitioning into the Q&A from our education partners. I'm going to try to keep a bit of time at the end to answer questions that you have posed, so please use your Q&A button to enter your questions. Those of you that have submitted questions ahead of time, I'm super grateful, and all of your questions and comments are so valuable for us in creating this webinar series, as well as other trainings to be able to meet your true needs. So let me welcome our panelists, beginning with our public health experts. We are honored to have with us Dr. Wenhao Chen, research scientist in the Indoor Air Quality Program of the Environmental Health Laboratory Branch in the Center for Health Communities at the California Department of Public Health. Dr. Chen is also an affiliate scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Her research focuses on how to apply and improve engineering methods to control indoor pollutants and to reduce human exposure. She has expertise in testing and modeling chemical emissions from indoor materials and products, characterizing electronic vaping devices and their emissions, developing indoor air cleaning technologies, and integrated building environmental system design. Dr. Chen holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from Syracuse University with an emphasis on building environmental systems and indoor air quality. We're also very happy to have Ms. Justine Weinberg, a certified industrial hygienist who has worked in the occupational health branch at the California Department of Public Health since 2007. Ms. Weinberg evaluates occupational environments and develops technical guidance regarding controlling occupational exposures to prevent work-related asthma and pesticide illness. Ms. Weinberg received her BS in environmental toxicology from UC Davis and her MS in environmental health sciences, industrial hygiene from the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. Go Bruins! Ms. Weinberg has authored and co-authored numerous peer-reviewed journal articles, and she's worked in health and safety for over 30 years, including occupational medicine at UCLA, private industry, and industrial hygiene consulting. We're also very pleased to have our incredible school administrator, Mr. Justin Ponzio. Mr. Ponzio is an assistant principal at Branham High School in Campbell Union High School District, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley. Prior to administration, Mr. Ponzio taught social studies and also worked for both Butte County Public Health in California and Denver Public Health in Colorado. Currently, he oversees the Wellness Center, College and Career Center, Master Schedule, and Site Equity Plan on top of COVID-19 safety on campus. He's passionate about building systems dedicated to helping students discover their passions and reach their goals. And I know, like most of us, he is a very busy school administrator. So once again, thank you all for being here. And now it is my honor to invite Dr. Wenhao Chen. Dr. Chen?
Hi. Hi, thanks, Dr. Dorin, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to briefly discuss the role of ventilation and other IAQ control strategies in schools during COVID-19. Next slide, please. It has been over a year since COVID started, and it is more clear now that there are three possible transmission routes of SARS-CoV-2 in indoor environment. First is short-range or close contact transmission, and this can be caused by both direct large droplet sprays as well as by the inhalation of smaller aerosols in the air jets produced by the infected person from their activities such as speaking and coughing. The control strategies that have been widely implemented these days, such as keeping physical distance and wearing masks, can help to greatly reduce this exposure pathway. And the second is formite transmission. And I think Justine is going to discuss this in more details shortly. And then the third route is long range or room scale airborne transmission. So this refers to the transmission through small aerosols or sometimes called particles that can remain suspended long enough in the air and travel far enough through room scale air movement or air mixing. The control strategies I'm going to talk about, such as building ventilation and filtration, will only have impact on reducing transmission through this route. Next slide, please. Yeah, for this transmission route, many of our previous knowledge in the indoor air quality field may apply. For example, the mass balance equation showing on the right-hand side tells us that the rate of contaminant accumulation indoors will equal to the rate of source emission minus the rate of dilution by ventilation and the rate of reduction by air filtration or disinfection. So source control is always first step among all IAQ control strategies. For SARS-CoV-2 specifically, this can mean both strict screening and asymptomatic testing program to eliminate infected persons and also requiring masks to reduce the emission source strength. The second is ventilation, and then the third will be air filtration or air disinfection. And this can be done by using either an induct device or filter in centralized HVAC system, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, or by using some portable air cleaner locally in the room. And I will talk about them in more details in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So let's quickly talk about ventilation first. Ventilation is the process that brings outside air inside the building and dilute indoor contaminants. Besides the airborne virus, it can also help to dilute other indoor air pollutants of concern, such as volatile organic compounds and formaldehyde emitted from building materials or cleaning products, as well as carbon dioxide and other bioeffluents generated by building occupants. There are three ways that outdoor air can enter indoor environment, including mechanical ventilation delivered by the HVAC system, the natural ventilation by opening doors and windows, as well as air infiltration or air leakage through the building envelope or building structure. There are a few concepts I would like to clarify here. The first is the outdoor air change rate does not always equal to room air change rate. Unless your system provides 100% outside air, then the room air change rate will be larger because it also included the partially recirculated air. Second, the outdoor air is not always mean clean air. For example, in case of wildfire smoke, which occurs fairly often these days in California, breathing unfiltered outdoor air can be even more harmful. Finally, opening windows and doors does not always provide sufficient ventilation because the amount of the outdoor entering this way will depend on the conditions such as wind direction and wind speed, as well as indoor and outdoor temperature difference. So therefore, the most controllable way for burning outside air is actually through mechanical ventilation system because the air can be filtered and then the amount of the outdoor air delivered can be adjusted as needed. Next slide, please. So if your system cannot provide enough clean outside air, then filtration should be considered. The graph on the top right-hand side here shows the fractional efficiency and how an HVAC filter might work. So in this graph, we see a group of curves with a minimum efficiency around 0.3 microgram particles. The number related with these curves ranging from 6 to 16 are the minimum efficiency reporting value or MERV value determined by an ASHRAE test standard. The higher the filter MERV value is, the better the filter efficiency is, with MERV 16 being the highest. And HIPAA, the high efficiency particulate air filter, they have removal efficiencies even larger than 0.99 and will be even better than the MERV 16 filters. So when considering the HVAC filtration, besides the filter MERV ratings, attention should also be paid to other factors that might influence their actual performance of viral or virus removal in real applications. For example, the filters need to be properly installed with no bypass and well maintained. And also the airflow rate going through the filter needs to be sufficiently large because the total clean air delivered is going to be determined together by the filter efficiency as well as the airflow rate. Currently, many organizations, including CDC and ASHRAE, recommend using filters rated MERV 13 or higher whenever possible, because these filters have reasonable removal efficiencies for even small size of particles around 0.3 to 1 micrometer. And also, the MERV 13 filter provides the best benefit to cost ratio in terms of airborne transmission risk reduction based on the simulation study as shown in the graph bottom right-hand side here. Next slide, please. So besides the induct or HVAC filter, another way to improve filtration can be use of portable air cleaners. There are many good resources available on how to choose a portable air cleaner. For example, AHAM, the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, they have a website that lists air cleaners with certified clean air delivery rate for tobacco smoke, dust, and pollen. And the certification also includes a suggested room size. So basically, a properly sized room air cleaner should have a clean air delivery rate for smoke that is at least 2/3 of the room area. Also recently, San Francisco Department of Public Health has posted an FAQs for portable air cleaners, and it contains lots of good information. Air Resource Board, CARB, also has some nice information on what air cleaners should be avoided. Overall, our recommendation will be to avoid devices that generate harmful pollutants such as ozone, and be very cautious about those devices that are lack of standard test method to validate their performance under real application conditions. There are plenty of air cleaners with HEPA or near HEPA filters available on market, and we think they are safer choices to use. Next slide, please. So in CDPH IQ group, we conducted some modeling analysis last year, trying to compare various strategies and combination of these strategies to reduce the risk of long-range airborne transmission in classrooms. And based on our modeling analysis, we recommend the following 4 strategies in classroom operations. The first is is wearing masks. So all individuals should wear masks whenever possible because this practice greatly reduce the emission strength regardless of ventilation and filtration conditions of the classroom. The second is trying to bring in outdoor air ventilation by opening doors and windows when weather and air quality conditions allow. And for mechanical ventilation system, trying to provide at least the code required minimum ventilation rate. Also consider using the carbon dioxide monitors, which can provide some quick feedback on the effective amount of ventilation to a classroom. And then the third one will be improve your filtration system. Ventilation system filters should be MERV rated, targeting at MERV 13 or better, as well as properly installed and maintained. This can provide additional substantial protection, especially if your outdoor ventilation is poor. And finally is to consider use of the in-room portable air cleaners. If the clean air delivery rate is sufficient, they can also provide substantial additional production, especially when the clean outdoor ventilation air is not sufficient or cannot be further improved. Depending on the classroom size, sometimes multiple devices may be needed. And also when you're choosing these devices, consider to use those with HEPA or near HEPA filters. Next slide, please. So one thing I would like to make clear here is that we are not recommending anything that is totally new or totally out of normal building operation conditions. So for schools, we think these recommendations are more like to take the current COVID-19 challenge as an opportunity to ensure adequate classroom ventilation filtration, and they will also bring schools other cool IQ benefits over the long term. For example, the graph on the right-hand side here shows the relationship of student illness absence and ventilation rate obtained from a 2-year study in California elementary schools conducted by one of our colleagues. And this study estimated that increasing ventilation rates in classroom from their current low level to the state ventilation rate standard would decrease illness absence by 3.4% and would increase attendance linked state funding by 33 million annually. So improved ventilation does bring extra health and economic benefits to schools. Also, improved filtration can also help to reduce indoor exposure to PM 2.5 particles. For example, recently the CDC just released a report that summarized the evidence of using indoor air filtration for reducing the wildfire smoke pollutant exposures. So when making decisions on ventilation and filtration improvement projects during COVID-19, I think schools should also keep these long-term benefits in mind. Next slide, please. So besides what I have already discussed, I just want to quickly mention that there are many other good information resources on school and COVID-19, and more generally on school and the improved indoor air quality. I don't have time to go through them in all details here, but I will share this list of useful information with you after this webinar. Next slide, please. Here, I also summarized a few state programs that I know for which might provide potential funding opportunities for school for their school HVAC system assessment as well as filtration upgrade project. They are administered by different state agencies such as CEC and Air Resource Board. Of course, they have like different selection and application criteria, but I think they are useful resources and please check them out if you have interest in applying any of them. Next slide, please. So that's pretty much of my talk today. Finally, I just want to thank the CDPH IAQ project team on school and COVID-19 as well as CDC funding support on this. Thank you for your attention, and I will return this back to Dr. Dorian.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. I mean, that's such helpful information, especially I really appreciated the formula. Of course, as an administrator who doesn't like math in general, when I first saw it, I was like, oh my goodness, but it makes so much sense to help us really think about the reality of the decisions we need to make with the source control and how masking is essential, really, regardless of what we're doing, and the isolation of the positive cases, as you talked about, but then really understanding what does ventilation mean and what does filtration mean. So thank you so much. And in a little bit, we're gonna have a few more questions for you. And now I'd like to invite Ms. Justine Weinberg.
Hello, everyone. Let me just share my screen. All right. So I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about really cleaning and disinfecting schools during the pandemic, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and a little bit about what we need to know about the health effects of the chemicals that we use and some best practices to minimize exposure to the chemicals, because that's an important thing to know. I want to start out by defining a couple things. In our work, we tend to think of cleaning and disinfecting as separate tasks, separate things, and we want to make sure that everyone understands what we mean by this. Cleaning, when we talk about cleaning, we think of it as involving, things like soap and water or soap and detergent, and especially, what we like to advocate and recommend is using third-party certified green products. So, because these are there's special criteria to make sure that these are safer. And it means that these products, cleaning means using products that doesn't have disinfecting agents in them. But cleaning, what's good to know about cleaning is that, it is also very effective at removing germs from surfaces and can decrease infectious risks on its own. It's cleaning, especially if you use tools like microfiber with the cleaning agents that helps enhance the cleaning properties. Disinfection means using a product that kills germs on surfaces, and there are specific agents in these disinfection products that do the killing of the germs. Frequent disinfection, however, is not without its risks. This can pose health risks due to the very strong chemicals that are used in them. And these risks are especially higher for children because they have developing organs and because they breathe in more air than adults in proportion to their size. So those are important things to know about these products. They're not recommended in the school setting unless a COVID-19 case has been identified. These recommendations and this information is laid out in the COVID-19 consolidated framework that was released in January. An important thing to know about disinfectants is that they are actually regulated as pesticides by the Department of Pesticide Regulation and the US EPA. They consider the label to be the law. So when they say keep out of reach of children, that is actually a legal requirement. Each label is on a pesticide product is a legal document, and any use that is not consistent with the label is in violation of the law. And in California, we have the Healthy Schools Act, where training is required annually for anyone using disinfectants at public K through 12 schools or licensed childcare centers. And when I say anyone, that includes any volunteers, any staff, custodians, anyone who uses these products in schools need to have annual training. And this training, there are, on the DPR website, they have links to their approved training. In our program, and the two programs I'm in, the work-related asthma prevention program and the occupational pesticide illness programs, we track cases of work-related asthma and pesticide illness. And we have found that many of the asthma cases associated with disinfectants are new onset, meaning that the worker, and these are just in workers, not in the general public. New onset means the worker had never had asthma before in their life, but they developed asthma after exposure to the product. And 2/3 of the cases we found are in bystanders, meaning they're not the person doing the cleaning, they're in the people who might be in the room at the time or enter the room right after cleaning. And we, in the occupational pesticide illness prevention program, we get a lot of reports of other types of illnesses like eye damage, skin burns and rash, and other inhalation illnesses. So, we treat disinfectants very carefully, and they should be used very thoughtfully. We have developed a healthy cleaning and asthma safer schools guide that helps schools find safer products and know how to use them. So I hope you check that out. And it talks a lot about using safer cleaners, green cleaners, and how to set up a program in your school. As Dr. Chen, stated earlier, there are different layers of safety in a school, in any setting really, but in schools we think of them as, the more layers of safety you have, the better your chances are of not spreading COVID-19. Top of that list is face coverings. Also, stable groups and physical distancing are very important. Adequate ventilation and filtration. Hand hygiene is key. Symptom and close contact screening, and then asymptomatic testing. These are all very important. And you notice on that list that we don't include disinfection because, in the early days of the pandemic, it was thought that frequent disinfection had a bigger role than it does. But now we see that it doesn't really have a large impact on preventing transmission. And since we have to balance that with the fact that it really creates real risks in a school, we recommend that it be used very judiciously. Some of those issues, like one type of product that's found in a lot of disinfectants, are called quaternary ammonium compounds. They're also known as quats. One example, and it's a pretty wide group of chemicals, a pretty big group with different subgroups in it. One subgroup is benzalkonium chlorides, and you see that in a lot of products. And some of the health concerns, of course, include triggering and causing asthma, but also dermal irritation. These chemicals are also being investigated for their role in reproductive and developmental effects, nervous system effects, and immunological effects. Bleach and peroxyacetic acid are also found in a lot of cleaners, and these can also have respiratory effects, including asthma. Bleach causes a lot of eye and skin burns. It has to be diluted very, very carefully. And they're both respiratory irritants and can cause other respiratory problems. So let's go back to cleaning, which, as I said before, significantly decreases germs on surfaces and decreases infectious risks. It's important to clean regularly, of course, but what do we clean and when do we clean it? What's recommended is to clean frequently touched surfaces with microfiber and soap and water would be ideal. And examples of things you'd want to clean are sink handles, door handles, shared tables, desks or chairs, or any shared item is a good idea to clean regularly. Shared technology, things like iPads, you can't really use soap and water, so check with a manufacturer. Sometimes there are different alcohol-based cleaners that might be more appropriate that don't ruin the electronics, and other supplies. And you want to clean daily. And if you have, two cohorts, like a morning cohort and an afternoon cohort, it's a good idea to clean between groups. Shared objects, if you can limit the use of shared objects, that'd be ideal. And I think even before COVID, this was a good idea, for example, to prevent spread of things like norovirus, colds, anything. It's just a good idea as much as you can. Even for staff, maybe provide separate tools and equipment like mops and spray bottles, or you can clean them between users if you need to for your staff. We get questions, there are questions too about what about playgrounds and what about buses, and playground equipment. Hand sanitation is really the key to keeping these clean and to lower the risk for children. So, have children wash or sanitize their hands before and after using the equipment. When hand hygiene is practiced, you don't really need to clean between groups. And bus is the same thing as other surfaces in the school. You want to clean frequently touched surfaces daily, or in between groups if there's time to do that. When do we disinfect? It's recommended that if you have identified a case in your school, then disinfect surfaces and the spaces where the person spent a large proportion of their time, in the classroom, if it's an adult, if it's a staff member and like an administrator, in the office where they were, if the child had to spend a lot of time in the nurse's office while being isolated before being sent home, then that's a good place to consider using disinfectants as well. I know that, that we get asked about fogging, what should we be fogging the building? There's really no evidence that this is an effective measure. And I would really be very careful with these, because these create very small particles that can stay in the air for a lot longer and be breathed in. So since it's not effective and could cause respiratory exposures, then these are not really a great idea. And I know a lot of schools have bought electrostatic sprayers, but be very careful that these are not used to overuse the chemical, like use on more surfaces than are recommended, or spraying it all over. Because if you notice on the list I had earlier of what surfaces to clean, it did not include walls or floors necessarily. So just be very judicious with the use of these. How do you choose better disinfectants? The preferred active ingredients would be hydrogen peroxide, and I mean the ones without peroxyacetic acid, citric acid, lactic acid, or products that have the US EPA's Design for the Environment seal, except they did okay peroxyacetic acid, and we don't agree with that. And so you'll see a label like this that says Design for the Environment, and this is available. These products are becoming more and more available, and it's good to look for them and also create a demand for them so that manufacturers make more of them. The things to avoid are bleach, quaternary ammonium compounds like benzalkonium chlorides, glutaraldehyde, and peroxyacetic acid. And the way to find them, and I'm sure you've all heard of EPA's List N, and you can just Google it, EPA List N, and it'll pop right up. And what's great about this tool, and before when they had lists of disinfectants for different things like norovirus or hepatitis, they'd create a PDF, and you'd have to search through the PDF. But they did a great thing with this list, is they made a searchable tool, and it keeps changing. This is how it looks like right now. And you can search on, say, active ingredient, and here I've chosen hydrogen peroxide, and it'll pull up, the ones that have that active ingredient in it. You can also search by contact time, EPA registration number, surface types, but active ingredient is a good way to search. And it'll pull up a list. SARS-CoV-2 is not always on the list, because the label, it doesn't, might not be on the label yet, like the manufacturer may not have changed the label, but it will include, what directions to follow for that product. And it'll also include the contact time for that product. which is a very useful thing you need to know. Contact time, or also known as dwell time, is how long it has to remain wet on the surface in order to actually work. So you don't want to use a product in a way that, you know, it isn't working properly, because then you're just wasting the money spent on it, and it's still not, it hasn't killed the the germ you're trying to kill. So that's just an important thing to pay attention to, because some products have very long contact times, like 10 minutes. So if it's a place where you don't have 10 minutes to wait in between, you know, where people are going to come back in, then it might not be a good thing to choose a product that says that has that long of a contact time. It's important to read the labels, even though they're very hard to read, the very small writing. They have a lot of information to keep your workers and your students safe. You know, labels will give you very important information, like how hazardous a chemical is. You know, you want to try to avoid danger if possible. So any labels that have the danger as a signal word might be one you don't want to get. It's also important as an employer, or as school districts and schools as employers need to supply safety data sheets for their workers who are using products. Labels and safety data sheets are used in training, you know, for the Cal OSHA required hazard communication training. Safety data sheets and labels have information about proper use, proper dilution rates, proper dwell times, and the personal protective equipment, or PPE, that is required. And as I said before, in California, anyone who uses disinfectants has to be trained under the Healthy Schools Act training. And don't forget to include bus drivers. If you're giving them products to use to clean their buses, make sure they are also trained properly. If the bus drivers are part of your part of the school district employees. A lot of times they're contracted, but if they're your employees, they need to be trained. And ways that we can decrease exposures to any chemicals we use in cleaning products and disinfectants. Here we go back to ventilation. You know, it's good for chemical exposure reduction as well. So you want to set it so that you're bringing in as much outside air as possible, which, you know, again, also helps with lowering the risk of being exposed to the coronavirus. You also want to keep it on during the cleaning. Sometimes, you know, buildings shut off their ventilation systems after hours, but you want to make sure that they're kept on during cleaning and for a while afterwards to help clear out the, anything in the air from that remains from the cleaners. If you don't have mechanical ventilation, you want to open windows and doors. You can use dilution systems that help take it from, it helps protect workers from the concentrated product. And it also, since it's automatically dilutes the proper amount, you're not overusing a product or underusing a product, using just the right amount. So many products come with special dilution systems that either are installed on the wall or attached to the utility sinks in the janitor closet. Other tools that help with the effectiveness of products and also help prevent exposures are microfiber, because it's so efficient, you aren't using as much product, and also wand sprayers. Instead of using a spray bottle that, you know, might be closer to the worker's breathing zone, you can kind of extend the area where it's sprayed away from the face. Other work practices are to spray the cloth instead of spraying it on the surface where it might bounce back. Also, never mix chemicals, like ammonia and bleach creates a very hazardous gas, and ammonia and acids create hazardous gases. And be careful also, because you want to pour into rinsed containers or flush toilets. Like, make sure that it's not going into a toilet that might have some other chemical in it. Another work practice is spray and leave. Spray and maybe come back and finish wiping later. And it's also important to build in enough time for workers to do their job properly and safely. Because, if they're doing extra cleaning, then you don't want them to be rushed, and you want to make sure that they, have the time to put on their safety, their PPE, and any, make sure they're not hurrying when they're mixing chemicals and things like that. For wipes, just want to reiterate, I know, you probably already know this, but they're never for use on skin. And they're definitely not for use by children. Like, children should not be handling these at all. And with PPE, follow the label or the safety data sheet to see what PPE is required, personal protective equipment. Gloves are always a good idea. You should always wear gloves. This is what happens if you don't wear gloves after using just a few wipes. Make sure the gloves aren't latex, because that can also cause asthma. And goggles are recommended as well to protect your eyes, your workers' eyes. And if you want to, go back to, I'm sure you're familiar with the Consolidated Schools guidance that has a lot of the information about when to clean and when to disinfect. And we also have a lot of resources on our work-related asthma prevention program website about safer cleaning and disinfecting. And for finding the design for the environment antimicrobial products, you can just Google that, but here's the link here. And thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Ms. Weinberg. This was amazing information. Both of our subject matter experts have provided so much information. I am in this world. I do this all the time, but this has been so informative, and I'm so very grateful. I just want to also remind everybody that we're recording this session, and it'll be posted on the Safe Schools for All hub. As you come down halfway, there's sort of a virtual training academy link, and you can go in there and share. But also for this one, definitely you can go back and review the details as you're moving forward with not just reopening, but continuously opening. And a lot of this information is not just for COVID, but something to really think about just in the sustainability and safety for our schools. So I would like to now invite Ms. Weinberg, could you stop sharing screen just so we can see Mr. Ponzio? I'm going to turn it over to the virtual, thank you so much, virtual podium for Justine Ponzio. He's going to begin with a round of poignant questions, and I'm also going to be posing questions that we've gathered from our school administrators. So, Mr. Ponzio.
Thank you. So while there has been recent news about installing the MERV 13 filters, what are other ways schools can properly ventilate classrooms? And what are other cleaning technologies schools can use?
Yeah, thank you, Justine. That's a great question. So I will try to answer it. For your first question, I think CDPH, together with CalOSHA and OSHBA, recently issued some interim guidance on ventilation, filtration, and air quality in indoor environment, and it has been posted on our website. So this guidance is intended for use for all the non-healthcare organizations in general, but also including school classrooms. So in that document, there are many good recommendations in terms of the practical steps on how to properly improve your ventilation system and, to properly ventilate your classrooms. For example, for naturally ventilated classrooms, one should open windows and doors as much as possible, and then consider additional measures. For example, using a window fan to trying to enhance your natural ventilation. And for mechanically ventilated classrooms, I think one should at least to check and verify that your system is providing and the minimum, code required minimum ventilation rate. And beyond that, you can consider other ways to further increase your ventilation rate. For example, setting your outdoor air damper to maximum, or set your economizer, to at 100% outdoor air, something like that. In terms of the second question of the other air cleaning technologies, besides the MERV 13 filters, we noticed that there are some air cleaning devices available on market and claimed based on other technologies like UV radiation or UV photocatalytic oxidation or ionization. For example, the bipolar ionization units seem to receive more and more attentions from school districts. However, we think that the school need to be cautious about purchasing these devices. For example, the ionization devices, they look very attractive due to their low pressure drop, as well as their claims of effectively deactivating airborne viruses. But there are actually a lack of standard test method that can validate their performance basically under real application conditions. And some of them might generate some harmful byproducts when they oxidize other volatile organic compounds in indoor environment. So I would say that more filter or portable air cleaners using HEPA or near HEPA filters should be safer choices compared to those other technologies. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question, Mr. Ponzio. And also, Dr. Chen, I think coming back again, I really like that formula that you put, which is really thinking about, and Ms. Weinberg brought it up too, really that mitigation strategy is layering, right? Thinking about all of these things. We can't do everything 100%. So really, what can we do so that we can stagger? I always say it's like winter wear, right? Just kind of layering as we're thinking about these mitigation strategies moving forward. So I have a question from the audience, which basically states, we change filters all the time, but right now, what should be the frequency of filter changing for air quality during COVID? Does that change? Is that something that we need to consider doing more often, or is there no differences when we think about the actual system?
Yeah, I think there are some general guidance in terms of the filter change frequency during COVID. If you visit the ASHRAE website for reopening schools and universities. So ASHRAE stands for the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineer. So basically, you know, they are like a professional organizations of the HVAC engineers, and then they have a very good like resource web page on how to operating your HVAC system during the COVID-19. And I think there are some guidance in terms of filter change frequency on their website. Basically, I think the filter change out frequency can vary from system to system. And then it may also vary due to the seasonal or outdoor air quality conditions consideration, right? For example, filters may need to be changed out more frequently if you are in a pollen season or a wildfire season. You know, there are more outdoor pollutants coming, and then, you know, the filters may, you know, capture them more, and then, you know, has to be changed more frequently. As a sum of the rule, I think I would recommend to checking filters probably at least every 3 months during COVID. Besides, based on the experience, and I think a more accurate filter change frequency may be determined based on the specific pressure drop that your HVAC system allows, and then the filter manufacturer's recommended final pressure drop. Because the way particle filter work is like once it captures the particles, you know, the pressure drop of, you know, for the airflow passing this filter will increase. And then when it increases to a certain point, then your HVAC system cannot afford that big pressure drop. So you have to change your filters. So if you install, let's say if you install a pressure drop gauge and measure the pressure drop across the filter real time, that might you know, provide a quantitative measure of the filter resistance, and then that can be used to determine, you know, when to change your filter sort of more accurately. So that's, you know, that's another approach, you know, engineers often take to determine when to change the filters. Yeah.
And I mean, I'm thankful for these details and somewhere that you can send me to look up resources. But I think one of the things that's also important is what you brought up, which is also the context of COVID, right? So it's not just COVID, but really thinking about those other things, pollen season, right? All of the other things, wildfire season. So really contextualizing as much as we can and coming back to those main kind of recommendations of thinking about more airflow, right? More like what are all of those things? So that makes it easy. So that's wonderful. Thank you. Mr. Ponzio, I believe you have another question.
Yeah, and thinking about what you just said earlier, Dr. Dorian, as far as the mitigation and the layering, the question that I had to do with how might foot traffic flow and the traffic flow of foot traffic contribute to a safer school environment?
Okay. I can take that one. Yeah, so creating areas where you have one-way flow of traffic will definitely help ease congestion. So it's a good practice to consider if you can set this up. Establishing that is a good way of limiting crowding and keeping physical distance, so that because if you don't have students that are passing each other in a hallway constantly, then they're able to kind of physical distance from each other. It's kind of similar to how they do in a supermarket. You don't want to have to crowd up against the canned beans so that someone can go by you, and so that's the same idea. And it does need to be monitored, though, because if groups start congregating, they can create a bottleneck, in either situation, whether you have one-way flow or not. So you kind of have to make sure that people don't do that, because then they'll create more crowded conditions. So it's a good idea, just needs to be monitored.
Thank you for that. And I'm just going to add something that we have a question here from our audience, and then we have another one that was in the Q&A. So I'm going to kind of combine them. And it basically comes back to just disinfection and looking at how to do it properly in a school where we could have students and staff that have asthma or any such type of, issues, breathing issues, COPD, some of those other issues. But also, I'm just going to add this second question, which says, you mentioned about the electrostatic sprayers. So the question was, could we use preferred active ingredients, right? And so in disinfecting for the school, and would that be a possible solution as well to use when we're considering even the students that have some of these other issues, as we're thinking, students and staff?
Those are both great questions. Yeah, we developed our the Healthy Cleaning and Safer Schools how-to guide to help schools choose safe products and use them properly. So, do check that out if you can. So using third-party certified cleaning products and EPA designed for the environment listed ingredients will help prevent health effects, including, for people with respiratory disease. Those are formulated in ways that avoid the worst ingredients. And then, and the idea is limit the use of disinfectants to only when they're needed, like when there's a known case, as stated in the guidelines. Make sure the rooms are well ventilated when products are being used, and for a couple hours afterwards. Don't use products when other people in the room. That's a very important thing. Avoid spraying products. And then as far as using the electrostatic sprayers, again, I have to go back to, if you can find a product that has a preferred ingredient, but also that the label allows that type of application, then yes, that would be a preferred. If you want to use electrostatic sprayer, that would be preferred, is to use the safer ingredient, but it has to be an approved application method on the label. Otherwise, you're violating the label. So if you can find that sweet spot of a preferred ingredient that you can use in that situation, but don't overuse the product, still, that is a good idea.
Great, thank you. Justin, Dr. I'm going to ask one more question while you queue up your question. So the next question I wanted to ask is, and I know you touched upon it, but it's really this idea now that so many of our counties are going into the red tier, really thinking about middle and high schools opening and realizing that in middle and high schools, it's a lot harder to have them have one room cohorts, right? Really looking at sort of these groups that would be shifting classrooms. You know, I know we've been talking about maybe having teachers be able to move and try to keep the students as stable as possible in the sense of movement, not just in stable groups. But now that we will be having that, because we don't all have the resources to be able to do that, how do we balance that cleaning of the classroom with that 5-minute passing time in the sense of moving the other ones into those classrooms? And what does that cleaning actually look like at that point?
You know, again, it's, you know, we have to go back to the layers that we already have in place, like wearing face covers and make sure they're worn properly, and hand hygiene, you know, making sure that they're washing their hands before and after if possible. They can use hand sanitizers. You know, again, because the disinfectants carry risks, you don't want to use them throughout the day, and especially, you know, between classes and, you know, in the secondary grades, you know, that'd be a lot of chemicals being used throughout the day. And you have to think of, you know, what are the exposures, not just to the students, but the teacher in that room all day. And it, you know, since, you know, cleaning a desk, you know, you could have, you know, safer cleaners, soap and water, or even a baby wipe or a microfiber cloth, you know, that would also clean the surface. Since wearing masks and hand hygiene helps prevent the surface from becoming contaminated in the first place, then just regular cleaning would help.
I actually very much appreciate, by the way, because I have a high school and we're also sort of in this thing, and this idea again of coming back and remembering sort of that science of mitigation again, that the mask and the hand hygiene is so key in thinking about, you know, doing that. And if we do that, and then think about the frequent, maybe we don't have to worry about cleaning every desk every minute as they're moving, because there's also loss of instruction time. And that's a lot of resources of 400 desks being cleaned every minute, you know, every time we're moving between classrooms, and what that looks like. So thank you so much. Mr. Ponzio, I think you had another question.
Yeah, this has to do with kind of the new variants that are coming out. Do the disinfectants kill the variants of coronavirus, and what extra measures, if any, need to be taken to ensure air quality ventilation in isolation areas, such as the nurse's office or isolation tents and rooms?
Because, you know, the type of virus it isn't changed by the variant. They're still the enveloped virus where the lipid structure of the virus is easily disrupted by, you know, the types of disinfectants that are recommended for the, you know, the main strain that we've always known. So there's no evidence or nothing to say that that the new variants are going to be resistant to the disinfectants. And the second part of the question, was that for Dr. Chen?
I think we were thinking about, like, as he was saying, is about just what about isolation rooms? And yes, it could be for Dr. Chen, right?
Oh,
Isolation
so,
rooms any different, both in the sense of ventilation and disinfection.
So yeah, that'd be the same. If it's an isolation room, you know, where a student is a positive case has been sent to wait until they could be taken home, then yes, then you would treat that as an area that you would want to disinfect, because it's a known case. The risk is a little higher, and that justifies, you know, doing disinfection of the surfaces in that room.
Yeah, in terms of the ventilation or the filtration in the isolation room or the nurse office, and I think again, you know, in that ASHRAE reopening school guidelines, they have some detailed recommendation regarding to the design and operation modification of the nurse offices or the isolation rooms in the schools. And in general, you know, there are some general rules or general considerations, for example, like keeping the room under negative pressure relative to the adjacent rooms or the corridors, so, you know, so that, you know, the virus, if any, you know, airborne virus will return in that room. And also you don't want to mix your isolation room air with any other spaces to reduce, the cross contamination, and just trying to directly exhaust your, isolation room into the outside. And also you can consider using higher efficiency filters than MERV-13, and then, bring in more ventilation air. For example, even like 6 air change rate or even higher. And yeah, I think these are sort of general rules, but if you really have specific concern of your nurse office or your isolation room, I would suggest you consult with a professional, like mechanical engineer, in terms of the design and modification operation to trying to make sure it's safe. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chen. Hopefully for us, with all the schools, our isolation rooms will be used at a minimum. That's sort of the way we're moving forward, and making sure that with all the other mitigations practices that we're putting into place. So I want to take this moment to thank all of our esteemed panelists for their wisdom and insight. Thank you all for being here today and sharing your valuable time with us. As I mentioned in the beginning, this is the 5th in a series of webinars for school administrators to create this forum to dialogue and work through with our subject matter experts, so you feel more confident as we reopen our schools and to keep our schools open safely. As I said, all the prior webinars are archived and loaded up on that Safe Schools for All website under the Virtual Training Academy tab. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks, and on Thursday, April 1st, focusing on stable groups in middle and high school. And then on the 15th, April 15th, we're going to do one on school-based sports, which I know is top of mind for all school administrators. We also have risk communication training for school administrators. You can find out all of the information back on that state's website. And again, thank you all for being here. I'm super proud to share the stage with everybody that we had today, and we'll see you all in 2 weeks.